Welcome to Puro Politics, the political podcast of the San Antonio Express News. My name is Gilbert Garcia, Metro columnist, and I'm joined by
business columnist and editor Greg Jefferson.
And we're recording this on Monday, April 27th. Later today, Governor Greg Abbott is going to be announcing his plan to sort of reopen the Texas economy, or I think kind of a tentative move toward that. Which apparently will take effect a week from now. And he's talking about opening hair salons, restaurants, some retail businesses. He said he'll do it in a strategic way and not in a way that will be careful and take into account the concerns that people have over COVID-19. Greg, one of the things I was curious about is, in looking at this, I find myself wondering, even if the governor puts something like this in place, how are businesses actually going to respond? And even if the businesses themselves open, how will the public respond?
Yeah, I mean, we've actually got, pardon me, a reporter looking in, she's checking in with retailers this morning. So on Friday, retailers that are kind of considered non-essential and had to close under the stay-at-home orders, they were allowed to begin offering curbside pickup and mail and in-person delivery. My guess is that as we go into the reporting, we're going to find a very probably muted response. I mean, it's just because you open a store doesn't mean the fear goes away. I mean, right. If you're offering curbside service, and we're 6 weeks into a shutdown, I mean, there are a couple of things at play. I mean, there's still, people are wanting to minimize person-to-person contact now. And a trend, they want as little or no physical contact as possible between the retailer and the customer. So, like, if you pull up outside a store, they'll put it in your trunk or something. I think for a lot of people, even that is a bit much. It's a little close. But the other part of it is, think about your own retail experience. I mean, how often do you go to take a bookstore, for example? Like, how often do you go to a bookstore knowing exactly what you want?
Never.
I don't. I very rarely go to a store knowing specifically what I'm after. I look around and I kind of pick something or not, and I either buy something or I leave. I think that's a pretty typical approach to retail. So I just don't. I think it's a very it'll have a minimal impact on retailers. But you also have to keep in mind that a lot of small businesses did receive paycheck protection loans, part of which requires them to hire back workers they've either furloughed or laid off, or to retain workers. So you've got a workforce, you've got to do something with them. I mean, you've basically got payroll covered by this loan for the next 2.5 months. So I mean, it's probably for retailers, if they've received, these loans, it's like, okay, well, it's something you're going to do just to, keep another line open to your base of customers. That and social media, and you hope that kind of gets you through. But I think, the economic impact is pretty small.
Yeah, one of the things that I've been looking at how the country has responded to stay-at-home or shelter-in-place orders is just how kind of schizophrenic the country seems to be about it. I mean, you had a recent Texas Tribune, University of Texas poll that found that 77% of Texans approved of the idea of staying at home or shutting things down except for essential services. Even 69% of Republicans supported that. Yet we've seen all these big protests in Pennsylvania and Arizona and in Austin saying we need to open things up again. You have a state like California where you have a progressive governor, Gavin Newsom, who's been very strongly in favor of stay at home. At the same time, he's kind of left it up to individual counties to decide what to do about the beaches. And we saw, I think it was Friday, Orange County beaches had like 50,000 people there, which seemed to, which
Yeah.
I think could create a lot of problems. And so it's
Yeah. Yeah.
even within a state like California, where you figure they're probably, they would have a governor who I think it really is solidly behind the idea of, people staying at home and protecting themselves.
Uh,
Even they aren't really following through real consistently. And so I think, and you've talked about this and you've written about this, just because of the economic, damage that's been done, and just on a personal level, the way people have struggled with, the change in their lives, staying at home, that I think there's a lot of internal conflict. People are scared to go out, but then they hate
oh, there is. Yeah. I
where we're
mean,
at.
we have no idea how to balance this either in our private lives or in our public life. Our
Right.
public officials, this is unprecedented. I mean, this kind of shutdown of the economy, and this kind of pandemic. The pandemic, not so much. We've had those in our history, but
Right.
this is an economic hit like we've not seen probably since the Great Depression. So, the reality is that the pain is enormous. I mean, we're talking about, in the last 5 or 6 weeks, unemployment claims across the U.S. hitting more than 26 million.
Right.
That's a lot of job loss in such a short period of time. And in Bexar County, I mean, over the last 4 weeks, this is about 1 week behind the national numbers, but we're number 4 in the state of Texas for the number of jobs claims after
Wow.
Harris County, Dallas, and Tarrant. So, that's a lot of desperation. It's a lot of people who are out of jobs. Many of them didn't have savings to fall back on. There's
Hmm.
going to be a lag time between their unemployment claim and when they actually receive the check. And this is not even taking into consideration the backlog that the Texas Workforce Commission is still kind of battling its way through. This is the agency that oversees unemployment. So, I mean, you can understand the pressure to reopen things. And, that's fueling a lot of the protests. You've also got a lot of ideologues involved in the fight. And,
Sure.
they're also helping to organize these protests. So it's kind of a confluence of things. And it's not, it's in that way, it's not really all that different from what we saw with the Tea Party eruptions in
Yeah.
2009 after the Obama stimulus package. But you've also apart from the pain, you've got some really significant, big, unanswered questions about
Yeah.
what relaxing these restrictions will do to the spread of this virus. I mean, that part is scary, and there are a lot of people, even some who are right now unemployed because of it, who
Hmm.
they're going to stick to social
Hmm.
distancing,
Yeah.
wearing masks in public, even if the government isn't requiring it. I mean, I think
No,
there's just a lot of fear.
you had an interesting column last week where you talked about kind of how our economy will change going forward. I mean, among the things I learned were the fact that you've been cutting your own hair through this, and that you nicknamed your haircut the pandemic, which and I found, I haven't had the guts to cut my own hair. I don't have a lot to cut, but I haven't had the guts to do it. So I
Oh,
I
it's
admire you a lot. Yeah.
Gilbert. It's so easy.
I
Why
know,
didn't
I know. I've
why
got to
didn't
do
you
it. I
do
mean,
this
how
before?
much
I
can I
mean,
mess it up, really, at this point? But so anyway, but one of the things you looked at there was how we've been moving toward a greater reliance on automation in our
uh,
national economy for a while, and I think you looked at the likelihood that this is just going to intensify, right?
oh yeah, and there's almost no doubt about that. I mean, you talk to any economist who follows this, any automation expert, manufacturers themselves, and it's clear that one of the things this pandemic has done has focused people, and I mean not just like industry people, but people in their homes, on supply chains. I mean,
Right.
you know we're having problems with scarcity of everything from toilet paper to Clorox wipes to eggs. I mean, all of that is being manufactured in abundance. I mean, there should be enough for there should be enough TP for every
Hmm.
bathroom in the country. A
Right.
couple of rules, maybe three. But yet, it's hard to find. I mean, that's a supply chain problem,
Yeah.
and that part of that has to do with human fallibility. I mean, you've got warehouses where people are, they're calling in sick, uh, they're practicing social distancing, which kind of slows down the work. You've got delivery drivers who are overwhelmed, they're falling behind. So yeah, I mean, it's making manufacturers and logistics companies like warehouse operators, uh, you know, it's making them think more about what automation has to offer in the way of efficiency. And, in the fact that, a robot cannot contract a virus.
Hmm.
And if you wipe the thing down, it's not going to spread it.
Yeah.
So those are things you're going to take into consideration after the economic crisis. I mean, everybody, every most every business right now is going to conserve its cash. Like nobody's going to go
Right.
out and buy a bunch of like an army of robots right now. Like nobody's going to do that. But once the economy begins to recover, I think you are going to see a lot of spending on automation and artificial intelligence.
Now, one of the things that we've heard about in over the last couple of weeks is, there have been some really large meat packing plants around the country where you had COVID-19 outbreaks, and
Mhm.
the companies have just decided on their own to shut these down. Have you heard anything from people, either grocery stores or anybody in the food industry that's concerned about the supply, uh, food
Oh
supplies
yeah,
being
yeah. I
affected?
mean, oh sure. I mean, it's meat now. I mean, who knows what it's going to be?
Right.
It could be easily produce at some point. I mean, the agricultural industries, like as we reported today, maybe it was yesterday. Anyway, yeah. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
this is there's a lot of vulnerability there to the spread of this virus, and it's worrisome. It's if you're an HEB or if you're a middleman, yeah, it's definitely something you should be concerned about, and the possibility of uh, you know certain kinds of meats becoming scarce is a real possibility.
Yeah, one of the interesting things we saw last week, a development with at the state level, is
Mhm.
we saw, and I'll preface this by saying that we've we know that the city of San Antonio is looking at something like a $180 million budget
Mhm.
shortfall that could grow as the time goes on. At the state level, it's going to be an enormous budget shortfall. We don't know exactly how big that's going to be, and both
Mhm.
the city and the state, unlike the federal government, they don't have the luxury of spending money they don't have. They got to balance their budgets, and so
Right.
this
Yeah.
is
Got
a
it.
real
Right.
crisis situation. And one of the things that we saw last week was that the Texas Senate Democratic Caucus sent a letter to Greg Abbott
Mhm.
urging him to expand Medicaid. And the backstory on this is that we've had two governors, Rick Perry and Greg Abbott, who over the last decade have both decided, I think largely because this Medicaid expansion was part of the Affordable Care Act. It was Barack Obama's legacy achievement,
Mhm.
and they didn't want any part of that. So under if Perry had expanded Medicaid, in 2013, 2014, the first three
Mhm.
years would have been 100% paid for by the federal government. It would have phased down to 90%. Even now, if Greg
Mhm.
Abbott decided to do it, the federal government would pay 90% of the cost for providing healthcare to what would have been about 1 million Texans. That number could be a lot bigger now because we're going to be I think
Right.
we're going to have a
Right.
lot more people who might be in that position in the next
Mhm.
over the next year who are going to fall into that category where they're going to be uninsured. And so they're saying, we just we're in a crisis situation. We need to do this.
Mhm.
I wanted to get your thoughts. I mean, I think it's doubtful that Greg Abbott would agree to this, but at the same time, we're
Mhm.
in this kind of crisis situation, and the state is going to trying to find whatever resources it can to try to kind of
Mhm.
help through this. I don't know if that would give him political cover to do this. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I mean, yeah, the thing is, it's it's hard for any Republican lawmaker now to pretend like they are hesitant to do anything big governmenty. I
Sure.
mean, when you have, I mean, you've got a Republican Senate in Congress that was deeply involved in $2 trillion stimulus package,
Hmm.
which dwarfs the Obama stimulus package from
Right.
2009. I mean, they're flooding the system with tax dollars. Uh, it's going to be quite a contortion for Governor Abbott to now say, you know, we can't do this.
Yeah.
I mean, this is not something,
That's right.
this is not something we can afford to do. Where at the federal level, we've seen, Republican politicians not think twice. I mean, do you remember any serious debate about the wisdom of passing a $2 trillion stimulus package? I mean,
Not
I
really.
don't.
Nope.
Um, on the other hand, I mean, he will have a ready-made argument for denying expansion of Medicaid. I mean, you've already got Republican lawmakers. You've got Speaker Bonin asking departments to make what a 5% cut across the board for
Hmm.
state departments.
Hmm.
Uh, More importantly, though, you've got the collapse of the oil industry, which is
Right.
going to have a profound impact on
Hmm.
state government. I mean, so much of government funding comes from tax revenue and fees from oil producers. And last week we saw an incredible collapse in oil prices. I mean, at one point,
Yeah.
the West Texas Intermediate, which is kind of the benchmark oil price for the U.S., it was negative $37
Hmm.
a barrel. I mean, if you take that seriously,
uh,
these are producers literally paying people to take the oil off of their
hmm.
hands. I mean, this is a crisis.
Yeah.
Um, and we don't yet know what the impact is going to be on state government, but it's going to be huge.
Yeah.
So given that, it will be a simple thing for the governor to say, if this is his inclination, it's like, look, this is not the time to be talking about expanding Medicaid. We're
Mm-hmm.
going to face this huge shortfall, and he'll be right.
Yeah.
But you've also got a health crisis and an economic crisis kind of flowing together.
And a lot of federal money on the
They were,
table that would be available.
oh
Yeah.
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 I mean, when you're talking about 90% of the federal government picking up the tab, I mean, that's a
Yeah.
pretty good deal.
Yeah.
But I mean, you've seen, as you mentioned, I mean, Texas Republicans have left really good deals on Medicaid on the table before, and they might do it
Right.
again.
Before we wrap things up, I want to talk a little bit about the presidential election, because
Mhm.
I think there had been a feeling out there that through this crisis, and obviously we're going through a lot of economic pain, and there's been a lot of, and it's been a public health crisis, and we're I think close to 55,000 Americans have died from the coronavirus. But I think there was a sense that because President Trump was out there every day doing these briefings, that he was kind of commanding the stage, kind of commanding the narrative, and that Joe Biden, the presumptive Democratic nominee, has kind of kept a low profile in recent weeks, and he was kind of letting Trump sort of control the message. There's, I think, been somewhat of a shift in that thinking in the last few days. I think prompted by Trump during the briefing last Thursday.
This wouldn't be about injecting bleach, would it?
Yeah. That was, he was kind of spitballing a little bit on the issue of possible cures for COVID-19, and started talking, just kind of musing about the possibility of injecting people with disinfectant, and he was talking about ultraviolet light as a possible.
I mean, Just think about
approach.
what
Yeah.
would happen if you injected disinfectants into your body while you were sunbathing. You would be practically bulletproof.
Yeah, I think
Like
I would
you,
have. Yeah, that's. And so, this, of course, the later the next day he said he was being sarcastic, which I think anybody who saw it would have a hard time
yeah.
understanding. If that doesn't kind of match my understanding of what the word sarcasm means, but
Uh,
but he's kind of tried to get himself out of that. But there's been a sense that maybe these briefings are starting to hurt him on some level politically.
mhm,
Democrats in recent days you've heard that there's some thought that they may even have a chance to flip the U.S. Senate, which has 53
mhm,
Republicans, and I think that Democrats hadn't really had too much hope for that. And one of the things I go back to, and pre COVID-19, was that over the last 85 years, we've had two elected presidents who have been voted out of office, and they were Jimmy Carter and George H.W. Bush, and both of them had really bad economies, and they had serious intra-party challenges. And I looked at Trump a few months ago and thought, well, as unconventional, as polarizing as he is, he's not going to probably have either of those problems. Now, of course,
mhm,
the economy is in horrible shape, and
mhm,
we don't know what the election is going to look like. We don't know what the state of the country is going to be in 5 months. We don't even know really what the voting process is going to look like. But
mhm.
what's your assessment of where things are politically?
Well, I think it's yeah, it's the idea that these daily briefings have been in Trump's mind kind of a substitute for campaign rallies.
Right.
I mean, we all know that these really get him. The rallies really got him charged up, and for obvious reasons, he had to discontinue them. That never really made sense to me because he's a populist. I mean, he's not an authoritarian, but he's also a populist. He feeds off of the crowds. I mean,
Right.
it's that is red meat to Donald Trump, and that's lacking
Mm-hmm.
in the context of a news briefing. So what you've got is a commander in chief in a time of crisis. Uh, Essentially campaigning. He's saying a lot of the things like as he would maybe in a
Mm-hmm.
rally, but the setting's all wrong. I mean,
That's
you
a really
want,
great point. Yeah.
yeah, but and it's for a while you were seeing his approval ratings. It's like I check Real Clear Politics for the average ratings every day. You
Mm-hmm.
saw it kind of creep up. It was kind of
Mm-hmm.
hitting 40 on average, 46, 47%. I believe it
Mm-hmm.
was last week or maybe the week before, and now it's kind of drifting back down. And I think that's because of his there are a lot of there's a lot of incompetency in what he's telling the public. A lot of stuff that's not true. A lot of really tinfoil kind of uh,
Mm-hmm.
loopy stuff like like injecting disinfectants and sunlight will take care of the coronavirus. I mean, it's untrustworthy stuff that he's putting out to the public. We know on its face it's untrustworthy. And I think you're starting to, that's beginning to be reflected in the poll numbers as they kind of start creeping back down. I mean,
Yeah.
Frank Rooney, the New York Times columnist, he had a pretty good piece in Sunday's Times pointing out that, I mean, of course, his approval ratings at the outset of the crisis and kind of midway through were rising, but with any other president, you would have had a kind of a rallying effect, a rallying of public support. Like,
Right.
we want to feel like our president is on the job,
Yeah.
and if they show any competency uh, at all, or they really seem like they do know what they're doing, we're going to support them.
Right.
And the fact is, Trump just has not gotten that kind of that rallying effect
Well,
for obvious reasons.
George W. Bush. I mean, after 9/11, I mean, I don't know exactly what the numbers were. We was probably somewhere around 90% approval for a period of
Mm,
time there. And so, yeah, we saw huge bumps, and Trump got
yeah,
he did get a bump, but it wasn't on that level. So, yeah.
yeah,
So, like
like
I
a
said,
few
there.
percentage points.
Right.
Yeah.
So, what the country will look like at in early November. It's a big question. I mean, we I think have heard over the weekend that Ron Nirenberg was saying that Fiesta, which had been, I think, rescheduled, it was, I think it was for November. He's saying, well, we don't know, and I mean, that applies to everything locally and statewide, nationally. We just really don't know what what the country's going to look like at that point. So.
Right.
Anyway, well, I think we're going to wrap it up on that note, and hope you all listening are doing well and staying safe. We thank you for listening, and we'll be back with you next week. Take care.